Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. On today's episode of me talking about stuff and things, I will be recapping and giving some opinions on episode 6 of Last One Standing, the competition series where 14 survivalists battle it out for the chance of winning $100,000. Before I continue, link below are some surveys. There's the Largados y Pilatos XL survey and the Last One Standing survey. If you want to check those out and maybe vote, that would be great. If not, that's fine. Moving on to the episode, we get to the elimination challenge pretty quickly, where the teams are tasked with shooting an arrow through a ring a good distance away, and the third placing team will be up for elimination, while the first two teams to complete the challenge will move on to a reward challenge where the team that processes the warthog the fastest will win a block of salt. Now, the challenge starts, and after a few tries, Gary manages to shoot an arrow through the ring, and his team moves on to the processing challenge. Danny is a little bit worried because she's a vegetarian and not used to processing meat, but she does what she can to help. Then, after switching places with Jeff and taking a few shots, Dan manages to shoot an arrow through the ring, and so his team moves on to processing the warthog, while unfortunately Kai, Patrick, and Darren will be facing an elimination challenge the next day, and one of them will be going home. Now moving back to the processing challenge, Dan, Jeff, and Trish are all very well versed in processing. So even though Gary, Fernando, and Danny had a head start, Dan, Jeff, and Trish managed to finish processing their warthog first, and they win the block of salt. And Gary and Fernando don't mind because they still get a warthog anyway. And so going back to the camps, Dan, Trish, and Jeff began work on processing their meat that they have and preserving it, while Gary and Fernando hang up the warthog over the fire and go off to do other things. And Fernando trusts Gary's judgment because Gary has more experience processing meat while Fernando does not, and Danny is not going to eat the meat, so she enjoys her fruit. And so we go over to Kai, Patrick, and Darren the next day because they're about to do a challenge, but Darren's injury has been bothering him, and the medics are called, and basically Darren has a torsion, and because they cannot treat him out in the wilderness any longer, he is medically tapped from the challenge. That's right, Darren is going home. And so Kai and Patrick do not have to face the elimination challenge as Darren has been tapped. And it's very sad because Darren is incredibly skilled and he had been doing really well up until that point, and he might have been able to make it through the elimination challenge, but we will never know because he is gone now. And also, it's important to point out that since it's day 22, this is the longest Kai has ever been on a challenge because her previous 5 challenges were 14 and 21 day challenges, so that's a milestone for her, but unfortunately it's dampened by the fact that Darren has been eliminated and she is very upset about this. And so for the rest of the episode, it's basically Dan, Trish, and Jeff kind of sitting back with their preserved meat, having a good time. And unfortunately, Gary, his processing methods have caused some of the meat to rot. And unfortunately, Fernando's stomach does not handle it very well. And during the night and the next day, Fernando loses his cookies. So many cookies were lost. It was very unfortunate. And we hear in a voiceover later on the episode that Gary and Fernando had to throw away a lot of the meat because it went bad, so that's unfortunate. And they decided to look for honey, and fortunately Danny, Fernando, and Gary found some honey that they chopped down from the trees, so they were able to get some nutrients from that, so that's good. And during one of the nights, a rhino comes by Gary, Danny, and Fernando's camp, and Danny decides to sleep in the tree for the rest of the night because those rhinos don't really care. They will go through the boma if they feel like it, so rather be safe than sorry. And then Jeff and Trish kind of have a moment where they're seeing that Danny left her bag unattended, and so Jeff was thinking, oh, maybe I could steal something, and Trish was egging him on a little bit. But it was all for funsies, and he didn't want to go ruffling through Danny's bag while she was nearby. And so it was, a little funny moment. I didn't take it too seriously, but Jeff is still pretty bitter about the whole stealing of the rope day 2 situation. So we'll see if Jeff can unintentionally get revenge by completing a challenge that Danny fails and Danny getting sent home. But I'm sure Jeff would want to send her home for that one thing that happened over 20 days ago. Moving on to Patrick and Kai's team. They are doing some hunting and they're having a little bit of difficulty with the bow, but fortunately, Kai moves up the knocking point of the bow and it does help her and Patrick with their bow and arrow shooting. And Patrick successfully gets a Nyala, which is really great, and they get lots of food, but the issue is Kai is the only one of the two that's experienced in processing, so she basically has to process this massive Nyala, and then there's talking about how the kukri knife isn't as sharp as it used to be, so she's having difficulty, and Gary comes over, and Patrick is a little annoyed and is asking, hey, want to trade some meat for some knives? But Gary was saying how the knives aren't his to trade. So there's a little bit of tension there. And Gary comes over and asks for a little sample of the meat. And Patrick says no. Kai says she doesn't have a problem with sharing, but she respects her partner's wishes. And the tension builds a bit more between Gary and Patrick because Gary is saying how he just wanted to see what was going on, and Patrick is believing that Gary just wants to come over for another handout. He was saying how Tiny Tim's coming for another handout, and so tensions mount and there's an argument between the two, and Patrick has had enough of Gary, and Gary's like, what did I do? And so Patrick dubs himself the Legend Slayer, and that rivalry has begun officially. So, will Patrick make it further than Gary in this competition? We shall see. And will Jeff make it farther than Danny? We shall see. Will Trish be annoyed with Dan? We shall see. Will that ever be up again? We don't know. Will Fernando catch a break with some more food because the poor guy has lost out on fish because he can't trade knives for hunting assets? A hummingbird just hit the window, I think. He lost out on some warthog because it wasn't processed correctly. And he only got a little bit of honey. So we'll see what happens with all of them. There's a nighttime elimination coming up. I have an idea who might be going home, but I'm not going to say. All in all, a good episode. Not as much arguing as last time, but things kind of got a little heated between Gary and Patrick. Dan, Trish, and Jeff are riding high right now because they did well in the processing challenge and got their block assault, even though it was a nail biter to see if their team was going to get third, but luckily they didn't. So that's interesting. Hopefully Fernando is feeling better. That really stinks for him. I just want the best for him. He's very nice, and so you can't root against him. And then Kai and Patrick are determined to win because they lost their team member, and Patrick got a successful hunt with the Nyala. So it'll be interesting to see where everything goes from here. Next week is the torch making nighttime figure 4 trap making challenge, and someone is going home. I believe only one. So I have theories who it might be. I'm between 2 people, but I'm not going to say because I'm usually wrong. But, we shall see. Thank you all so much for listening. Please like, comment nice things, and subscribe, and click the next video if it's mine. And I hope you all have a wonderful day/night. Thank you so much. Bye-bye now. Bye-bye.